Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for coming. I apologize. The talk will be in English, of course, but I hope it's interesting. What I wanted to talk about today is the differences I see between the best product teams and the rest. I've spent almost all of my career working with both kinds of teams. It happened very early, my first exposure to the differences. And mostly what I write about, if you read any of the articles or books, is I write about the difference. I write about how I want to share more about how the best companies work. There's really no science behind it. I am lucky enough to work with a lot of the very great product companies, consistent innovators, and when I see them using a technique or a tool or a method, then I start asking if the other companies I know that are very good are using those techniques. And if they are, my rule is normally if I can find 6 teams at 6 different companies using a method or a technique that's working for them, then I'll talk about it. Here, I talk about it in books, I talk about it in articles. But I'm asked all the time, people ask me, what about this technique? What do you think of that? And if I haven't seen it used in those companies, I say, I don't know, really. Maybe one day it will be used in the best companies, and then I'll talk about it, but until then, I'm just going to focus on what they're using consistently to succeed. Now, the surprise is not so much how good companies work. The surprise is how different that is from how most companies work. And what I wanted to focus on in this talk was 10 of the biggest confusions that I see in product teams that are not working like the best. Now, these 10 things apply to startups, which is where I spend most of my time, startups, but they also apply to growth stage companies, scale-ups, and enterprises, very large companies. All of these 10 apply to all of them. So I hope that means it's going to be relevant to you. I don't want to spend much time talking about me because you can look that up if you want, but it is important. I think we all bring biases. We all bring our own experiences. And I started for the first 10 years of my career as an engineer. And so a lot of you probably began as engineers. And I was very interested in not just how to build great products, but how do you decide what to build? And that's what led me to design and product management. Honestly, my interest has always been product teams, because that's where products come from, product teams, or if you like Spotify's term, squads. Cross-functional product teams, product design and engineering. I talk the most about product managers, but I'll be honest with you. That's because product managers are where most of the problems are. Designers and engineers are not nearly as confused. So I'm going to do that here too. I'm going to focus in. In fact, one of the 10 items is probably going to be uncomfortable for you, but it's so important and really gets to the product role. Okay, so let's talk about these 10 major misconceptions, and we'll save some time for questions at the end. But first misconception. So many teams I meet, especially companies that want to start, founders of startups, they think they have to solve a new problem. They think that's their job. And don't get me wrong. Interestingly, my very first visit to Paris was, it was so long ago, most of you probably weren't born, but it was, do you remember Minitel? So like Minitel was the internet before the internet. And that was very innovative. That's why I came out. And Minitel was an example of this, really a new problem, new area. There are not very many things like that. And of course, Minitel, they could not have known the internet was going to happen in just a few years. But it was still a very ambitious and courageous product and effort. But the truth is, almost every great product out there is not solving a new problem. They are solving old problems. This is really important to understand because, and I mean literally 99% of the great product teams I find, they are all working on old problems. Every one of these are a lot of what I consider many of the best products in the world from all kinds of companies. But in every one of these cases, there were many products before it solving that problem. And the difference was they were able to find a solution that was dramatically better. So you don't have to think of the next Minitel, or there's a few things I've worked on, and it's fun to work on a new problem. That's called category development. And it's very expensive, by the way, because you have to educate the market that this is a problem they should care about. All of these problems, Apple didn't have to convince the world they needed a better cell phone. We all had cell phones. They were just not good. One of the funniest things that I find hard to believe, but Google search. I first met Google when there were 6 employees. 6. And do you know that when they started Google, the industry analysts told them they were crazy to start Google because there were already too many search companies, which there were. I remember them. There was Alta Vista and Yahoo and Lycos and all these searches. The problem was they were all terrible. They really were terrible. I'm not exaggerating. You would have to go through several pages of search results to find what you wanted. And all of a sudden, this small team at Google creates a prototype that shows you results that are good in the first 2 or 3 results. This was amazing. Old problem, much better solution. So this is the first big confusion I see out there. People think they need to solve a new problem. Very rare. Related to that is the next issue, which is so many product teams think they need to spend so much time learning about what's referred to as the problem space. In other words, we have to sit down and meet and interview our customers, and we have to do all this user research. Now, this is a little tricky. I have to be careful here because I love user research, genuinely. I've probably been responsible for companies hiring more user researchers than almost anybody, certainly that I know. However, the user research that we need is not this. Here's what it is. If you had all the time you wanted, spending a lot of time learning about the problem space, it's great. But you don't have all the time. The clock is ticking. If you're a startup, you're going to run out of money. If you're a big company, your manager's going to run out of patience. This is what happens. And the most important thing, one of the most important things to understand in product is this. For those that don't know Ben Horowitz, he is one of the best product thinkers in the world, in my opinion. He's the co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz. Ben and Mark Andreessen, they both worked with me at Netscape. I worked for Mark Andreessen. He was the co-founder. Ben worked for him as well. I learned so much about product from Ben. By the way, he wrote a wonderful book that if you haven't read, I would strongly recommend, called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Yeah, it's a very good book. He also wrote a great book on product culture. But this point is so true. And this is what I try to emphasize to product teams. What's hard about product is not understanding the problem space. It's coming up with a solution that's so much better than the alternatives that your customers choose you. Now, Ben argues you have to be 10 times better. It's hard to quantify 10 times better, sort of hard to know. But I will tell you, when you talk to a team that switched to Slack, most of them describe an experience that they consider is about 10 times better. When you talk to a team that switched to Stripe, especially the developers, they talk about an experience that's 10 times better. If you're building a website, Shopify, 10 times better. It's so much better. All of those, again, were existing problems. But the solution is what makes the difference. Now, please don't misunderstand that. If you build a solution for a problem that people don't have, that's not going to do anything, right? So you do have to make sure you're solving a real problem. But my point to you is, that's not hard. And you have to be careful not to spend so much time on the problem that you have no time for this. We often talk about the difference between problem discovery and solution discovery. I mean, usually I'm just happy when a team is doing some discovery, because a lot of times there's none. That's not an exaggeration. No discovery at all. All they do is implement the features on a roadmap that their stakeholders give them. So, okay, we know that. But when the team spends time on discovery, I want them to be able to get a successful solution out of that. And if they spend too much time on what's called problem discovery instead of solution discovery, they won't have time to come up with a product that people will buy. So the only big thing I want you to take away from this is that it's critical that you spend your time on coming up with a solution, you've probably heard this, but that's valuable, usable, feasible, and viable. Customer will buy it, they can figure out how to use it, we know how to build it, and it will work for our business. That's solution discovery. That's where you need to spend almost all of your time in discovery. Okay. This is another really big, deep-rooted problem. In fact, many of you have seen this. If you ever wondered why consumer products are generally so much better designed, better to use, more effective than B2B products, have you noticed that? B2B products in general, and I mean this around the world, are terrible. The quality of, if you've ever seen SAP, or if you've ever seen Oracle Financials, or even Workday, which in its day was a little better, but I mean, these products are not good. They're just not good. And one of the biggest reasons they're not good is that the companies think that they need to hire people like product managers that come from the space. So, for example, if it's a banking solution, they want product managers that come from banking. Or if it's a healthcare solution, they want people that come from healthcare. Why? Because they say, well, these people know the domain. This is a really big one because just look at the industry. Where do the most successful products, including and especially in the B2B space, come from? They come from people that were not experts in that space. I mean, that's a pretty consistent trend. The current one, I'm sure you followed the whole market frenzy behind buy now, pay later. Do you know buy now, pay later? Afterpays, Klarnas, you know these products. Don't you think it's amazing that this biggest innovation in credit didn't come from any of the credit companies? Why is that? Because Shreyash is right. If you don't know Shreyash Doshi, you should follow him on social media. Mostly social media is terrible, in my opinion. Twitter, LinkedIn is really hard to find useful content about product. He's an exception. Should listen to him. So he's right. True domain expertise is knowledge of the domain minus dogma. Dogma, I don't know how well that translates, but that means religion. And the problem is if you hire somebody from, let's say, a bank, the banking industry, and they know that banking industry or they know healthcare industry so well, it's very difficult for them to know what are the things that they're doing because they need to, and what are the things they're doing because they've always done them that way. It's just very difficult. But if you take any of you and say, all right, I know you've worked in other spaces, but you now need to go learn about banking. The difference is you have that open mind. Now, you do need to learn the space. You need to learn this true domain expertise. But for most of us, that takes 2 to 3 months. It's not that hard. And we will often have access to a domain expert. Like I work with one of the companies I advise is in medical technology. They have a chief domain officer, somebody that is an expert in the medical technology they do. And every product team is able to sit down with that person and ask them, would this be okay? Does this follow the regulations in the United States or not? So you need access, but it is much better to come with that open learning mind than it is to have to try to figure out what are the things you know that are really important and what are the things that are just legacy. So the point really here is don't think you have to hire people from the domain. What we're generally looking for is people that learn quickly. That makes for a good product manager. Yeah, next one here. Oops. This is, I can't believe I'm still talking about this in 2022, but it is still a major problem. People think that, and this is both B2B and B2C. The good news is we have many more teams talking to their customers today, and I'm happy about that. That's good. It's ironic, but it's good. The bad news is too many teams think that their job is to get requirements from them. And I have more quotes on this one than any other topic because whether it was Steve Jobs or the Collison brothers at Stripe or Elon Musk, they'll all tell you the same thing, that customers don't know what's possible. That's why customers can't tell you. They can tell you things about their environment, they can tell you what they think, but whether the solution you need to build, They can't. The point of product is to combine their problems, real customer problems, with solutions that are just now possible that will work for our business. Those are the three dimensions. And so that's why. And Jeff Bezos, I mean, he's not the CEO anymore. You probably know that for the last year. But every year in the shareholders' letter he would send out, he would remind people of this. The last year it was, I just want to remind everybody that no customer asked us to build AWS. You just heard a little bit about AWS and competitor to it. And his point is constantly to say our customers don't know what's possible. We do. In fact, he tells his product teams, I can't tell you what to build. Your customers can't tell you what to build. Your job is to invent great solutions on our customers' behalf. So for our customers. This is really referred to as product principle number 1. Most important product principle. Steve Jobs used to hold up his iPhone and say, you can conduct 100 focus groups. You will never get an iPhone. This is very important. I mean, it's very true. And it gets right to why so many product teams don't come up with good product solutions. They think that they get the solution from interviewing customers, or even worse, interviewing stakeholders. It's not where they come from. Okay. I talked to a startup literally just a couple weeks ago. And by the way, a founder that's a very smart person who I've known for a while. But he's told me he was out of time with the startup he was doing. He had spent 3 years and they could not get to product market fit. And he was ready to give up. And he asked me to take a look at what they had learned in discovery. And I was so surprised to see they created an MVP right at the beginning, 3 years ago. What I was so shocked to find, they have the same MVP 3 years later. What he was doing was, he built this idea that he was very excited about, and then he believed the way you do a good product is you don't give up. You keep persisting. So what that meant was he tried different positioning, he tried different pricing, he tried moving from a freemium model to a trial model. He tried every single variation he could, except changing his solution. And it was such a shame, because that is 3 years of wasted time and work. It was really gone. There's nothing you can do after that. And what he didn't realize is that what you want to do as a founder is not fall in love with your solution, but fall in love with the problem. And this is the sad part. He was working on a very worthy problem. But instead of trying in 3 years, realistically, he could have tried more than 100 approaches. He should have tried more than 100 approaches. Now, it's a very hard problem he's working on, so there's no guarantees that even with 100 attempts he would have solved it, but he would have had a much better chance than trying one. And this is so important to understand, that as long as we solve the problem, that's just discovery. We iterate all the time. Sometimes we change our approach. Sometimes we improve the current solution, but we're constantly trying. And the thought that you could persist for 3 years with the same solution and not realize it's time to try another approach In fact, one of my friends, Teresa Torres, many of you probably know Teresa, she wrote a very good book recently called Continuous Discovery Habits. And if you haven't read it, I would encourage you to. And Teresa loves a technique. I believe she came up with it. I'm not sure, but she taught me the technique, and it's called opportunity solution trees. And it's not a big deal. It's actually a very simple technique. That's one of the reasons I love it. But it's meant to prevent this problem. If that startup team had done a solution tree, what it really makes you do is realize right at the beginning that there are many different ways we could approach this problem. And if the first one doesn't work after a few weeks, let's try another one. They would have had that in front of them, and it would have given them a mindset that had the focus on the problem, not on their particular idea for a solution. But we all know many founders fall in love with their solution. I mean, a lot of them have been dreaming about that solution for years, and they finally get some money to pursue it. And it's very dangerous to fall in love with the solution. Okay. Yeah, this is the one I didn't know how you'd... But this is one that's so important. It really is. And I'm going to admit, this is a much bigger problem in Europe than in the US. In the US, we have other issues, and I'm glad to point them out. But in Europe, this is probably the single biggest cause I see of weak products teams. And I need to really take a minute to explain to you why this is a problem. First of all, it's essential to realize product owner is a role in a delivery process. That's what it is. Now, first of all, it's a role, it's not a job. Second, it's delivery, not discovery. Most of all, it's a process. Process is not what this is about. Now, I have a theory as to what went wrong. And let me just step back. You tell me, what do you think is the more agile team? Is it the team that has a product owner, has a scrum master, has an agile coach, they do sprint planning, they do daily stand-ups, they do retros, but they release once a quarter? Really, release once a quarter, or maybe once a month. Versus the team, say, at Amazon, that thinks agile is a bunch of BS. Yet they release many times a day. They have no product owners, they have no scrum masters, they have no agile rituals, yet they do continuous integration and continuous delivery, CI/CD. Who would you say is more agile? To me, it's obvious. And let me just be brutally clear here. If you're not releasing at least once every 2 weeks, you can call yourself agile if you want. You're not fooling anybody. That is not agile in any way, shape, or form. Now, the bigger issue is what in the world happened? How is it that we have so many product owners in Europe that think it's their job to follow this agile process? And the sad part to me is there's really nothing wrong with agile. Agile, if you look at the manifesto, it's a set of principles that's pretty much anybody who's been on a good team will say, this is great. There's really no principles in the manifesto that's a problem. They're good. The problem, honestly, is that process people took over Agile. They completely took it over. And that's why you have, and you know, the fact that you have product owners, that's not really the problem. The problem is who trained the product owners. Mostly they were trained by Agile coaches that know nothing about product. This is a really major problem. So what I'm encouraging you to do, your company does not need product owners. That's the reality. Your company does need product managers. And that's a completely different job. It is a completely different job. I want to be clear. One is a role and a process, and the other is a major responsibility on a product team. If you're a product manager on a product team, your job is value and viability. You have to make sure that the products you come up with, you are a maker. Your designer focuses on usability, your engineers focus on feasibility, and you as product manager are focusing on value and viability. Together, you're crafting a solution that's valuable, usable, feasible, viable. Now, the truth is, your engineers come up with a lot of the best ideas for value. Your designers come up with a lot of the best ideas for value, so you're all helping there. But this is specifically your responsibility. Mostly, the designers and the engineers don't know the viability. So does everybody know viability? This means to make sure your solution is something you can afford to build, you have the money for. It's something you can monetize. You can make a business off of it. It's something you can effectively market, effectively sell. It's something that respects the, say, EU privacy constraints and rules and laws. It's something that respects ethical considerations, compliance. That's hard. That's the product manager's job. Imagine a product team that didn't have somebody that knows that. And unfortunately, almost everybody I know that has been trained just by a certified Scrum product owner or quote, professional Scrum, PSPO or CSPO, they have no idea of this stuff. And so what happens? You have a product team trying to come up with a solution that's valuable, usable, feasible, viable, and the engineers don't know, the designers don't know, and the product owner doesn't know. So then what happens? You have to escalate everything up to your leaders, or you have to make any kind of decision, you have to get all the stakeholders in a room, which leads to something called design by committee, which is never a good result. So I really want to encourage you to realize your job is not a process role. You don't want on your LinkedIn profile a job title that is a role in a process. That is not a good thing for your career. Now, I want to be clear, if you really step up and become the product manager, you should cover the product owner responsibilities. That's normal. It's normally about 10% of the work. It's not a lot of time to cover that. Or, to be honest, it doesn't even matter if your team uses Agile. If you do continuous deployment, you're done as far as that's concerned. You're already better than most Agile teams. So it's important to realize, what is it really? Process, I'm going to talk about process at number 10, but process is dangerous. This is not about process. Now, I'm still trying to understand. I've been asking so many people all over the world, but especially in Europe, why is it in Europe so many people are obsessed with the process? What is going on? I don't understand that. And it's not helping you. It's hurting you. And don't get me wrong, the U.S. is not perfect. In the government area of the U.S., which is mostly in the Washington, D.C. area, they are pretty obsessed with process too. And you can see the results in the U.S. government. So this is a big one for you. All right. Another one you need to come up with all these innovative product ideas. Another one of those misconceptions. And it's not just product managers that think this, it's CEOs and stakeholders. They all think they have to come up with these innovative ideas. And when they're not realizing, and Steve Jobs called this the disease of thinking that an idea is 90% of the work. And it's not, it's just the opposite. In fact, he goes on to describe the nature of product discovery, where he talks about an idea is just the start. A product comes out of this discovery process where you're iterating, and every iteration you do, you learn some things that you need to change, other things that are working, and you keep iterating on it until you've crafted a great solution. He talks about the collaboration, especially the collaboration between engineering and design. I'm going to talk about that next. But you need to realize ideas are just ideas. They're really not much. What you want to focus on as a product team is molding that idea into a solution that's valuable, usable, feasible, viable. For most of us, what that really means every day is sitting around a prototype created in something like Figma and constantly iterating it, testing it on users, testing it on stakeholders, testing it on engineers. You saw Figma was just sold to Adobe for $20 billion. I couldn't believe that number. But why? This is what people are doing with it. And that's what it's for. Okay. Very related to this problem is thinking that your engineers need to be focused on coding. So many people think the only purpose of the engineers is to build. Now, the worst form of this, by far, and this really makes me upset when I find it, the worst form of this is when the engineers are not even employees. They're outsourced. If your company is outsourcing your engineers, I mean, that tells me this is a company that's not serious about product. I mean, very honestly. This is as basic as you get. One of the most fundamental differences between strong product companies and the rest is how they view the role of engineers. This is another great Steve Jobs quote, but he's right. They don't hire all these engineers to tell them what to do. They hire them to show them what's possible. And you know, I showed that slide in the beginning with all those logos, Tesla, Stripe. You know, another thing that almost all those companies really have in common? The innovations came from the engineers. And the funny thing is the way most companies, the rest work, the engineers are not. In fact, I'll make this very specific for you. If the first time your engineers are seeing your product ideas is at sprint planning, you have totally failed. That's the opposite of what a good company does. Because at that point, they're just there to build. Maybe to play a little estimation game and then build. No. The real solutions come from the engineers. In fact, another practice in the best companies is the engineers don't have to build something a product manager tells them to build. They only build if they agree. And that's an intentional self-correcting mechanism. The idea there is if your engineers don't agree that they should build something, there's one of two problems. The first is they're right. This is a stupid idea. It's very often. Most common reason for that is the product manager is just copying a competitor's feature. And they have no evidence really why we should do this. They don't even have evidence that that competitor, it's working for them. Without seeing their data, they wouldn't know. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is it actually makes sense to build this. But the product manager has not shared the reason why with the team. And we need the team to believe it's the right thing to do. We don't want them to build something because we told them to. We want them to build it because they believe it's important. This is Bill Campbell, who was known as the coach of Silicon Valley before he passed away, used to say the single most important thing in a strong product company is the notion of empowered engineers. This is an engineer that doesn't just code, but they care just as much about what they build. And by the way, this is the normal hiring practice for strong engineers, interviewing to make sure they care just as much about what they build as how they build. All right. So another really common problem is the product team, engineers, designers, product manager, get so focused on coming up with a product their customers love, which obviously is a good thing. The problem is, that's only half the equation. When we talk about product market fit, that's the product side. We also need to talk about the market side. And a lot of product companies don't. And in fact, the way you'll usually see this, and I can point, this is a real problem in Silicon Valley, especially over the last few years when most startups, to be honest with you, had too much money. They were given too much funds. What they would do is, as soon as they started seeing a cool product being created, they would ramp up sales and marketing people, which, as you know, is very, very expensive. And then you have all these salespeople without a product to sell, or without a good product to sell. And now the company starts doing all kinds of bad things. And in fact, that's what's happened to so many thousands of companies. But what's really going on is you don't just need a product your customers love. You also need to make sure that's a product that your customers can find. So we have to make sure the go-to-market for that product. I mean, this is a major conversation in and of itself. Is your product intended to be sold through a sales force, through reseller channels, or is it a product like Slack that is designed to be sold online, or like all of Atlassian's products, be sold directly to the teams? Those are very different go-to-market models. And you have to make sure that your customers know that you exist, they can find you, they can understand what you do, they can try your product, and then they can buy your product. This is the go-to-market path. Just doing a great product that your customers can't learn about at the right time, that works for them to acquire it happens all the time. It doesn't go anywhere. So when we talk about product market fit, it's both sides of that equation. And if you're trying to manage your money well, you don't want to ramp up sales and marketing until after you have demonstrated product market fit. Because before that, you're going to waste a lot of money. Okay. The last point is this belief that you need process people in order to grow. Now, my whole rant about product owners before, that was mostly aimed at Europe. This is a worldwide phenomena. This is worldwide. In fact, I was talking about Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, before. You may know he would talk a lot about the way he liked to frame the world is day one companies, day two companies. I don't know how many of you have heard that, but a day one company, no matter how big you are, you act like a startup. You actually care about your customers. You try incredibly hard to please your customers. You are working to come up with solutions they absolutely love. A day two company, bureaucracy. You've seen them. They're all over. Big companies where it's so painful to do anything. And his biggest fear, he said this many times, his biggest fear was that Amazon becomes a day two company. Steve Jobs had the same fear. He didn't call it day one and day two company, but he talked about the disease of process people. That's literally his term. And he liked to talk. You have to realize Steve Jobs, he was doing his product work for 30 years, for a long time. And the era he grew up in, the giant wasn't Google, it wasn't Amazon, it was IBM. Many of you have at least heard of IBM. But IBM used to be the most intimidating, awesome, innovative company. And then they lost it. They completely lost their mojo. And in fact, Steve Jobs publicly said, process people took over IBM, which is true. Most IBM people will tell you that's exactly what happened. Took over. Innovation, no more. The company's a tiny fraction of what it used to be. So many leaders are so scared of that. This quote from everybody's favorite character, Elon Musk, but he's right. The problem is that big companies, process becomes a substitute for thinking. Bezos likes to say, be very careful. As a company gets larger, it's very easy for process to become the thing. Steve Jobs said many times, it's the product. He also talked about it in terms of content, not the process. They have process there, but product is king. Some of you may know Steve Blank. He's a longtime entrepreneur. He's really known as the father of the lean startup movement. And anyway, he likes to say, look, the problem is as companies get bigger, they usually process people start becoming prominent, and over time, the process people get promoted and product people are now working for process people, and they don't want to, and so they leave. They go to somewhere where they can create again. I will tell you I have never seen any other topic that all the major leaders of the best product companies are this scared of. They are all scared to death of their companies getting taken over by process. I think that should scare everyone. And it should make you think hard about, do you want to associate your career with a process or with a result, with something more meaningful? So, okay. There's more I need to learn about what the attraction of the process really is. But for now, I can just tell you that is a very visible difference between the best companies and the rest. Their reliance on process, their belief in the religion of process. Okay, so this all sort of begs the question, let's say you wanted to change your company to be more like the best companies. What does that really mean? If we were to double-click, take away all the buzzwords. There's a lot of buzzwords around transformation. Take those away, and what does it really mean? And it means three things. When I meet a company, I'm looking at these three things. Sometimes they've got one or two. Sometimes they already have all three. It doesn't, wherever they are, I'm trying to understand. The first is changing how you build, test, and deploy your products. I said this before, but every product team, each squad, needs to be releasing. I mean, that doesn't just mean a build, right? It means you are releasing to your customers no less than once every 2 weeks. Now, that's the original reason I encourage teams to move to Agile, because moving to Agile, moving to Scrum, which is what most of them move to, if you actually do what you're supposed to do, you're releasing no less than once every 2 weeks. And that forces the team to get their test automation, their release automation, their instrumentation in place so that they have a reliable mechanism. And then, of course, once you're releasing consistently every 2 weeks, it's not that hard to start releasing once a week, and then once a day, and then several times a day, each mini release, its own atomic release. Now, hopefully everybody here already understands why the best companies do that. It's called continuous delivery. It's better for us, and it's much better for our customers. A lot of people in the world still think if you care about quality, you need to go slow and do something like a quarterly release. We have had evidence for more than 20 years that that's the opposite of what the truth is. If you're interested, there's an excellent book called Accelerate that talks about not just continuous delivery, but it talks about all the evidence at these companies about why continuous delivery actually yields better quality for our customers and better velocity. So, frequent small releases. Again, if you're not releasing every 2 weeks, if you're releasing quarterly or monthly, you're not agile. Now, I don't know how many of you might be using a process like SAFe, but if any of you are, hopefully you know that that's not even agile at all in any shape or form. That's just pure marketing. They labeled it with agile to try to fool a bunch of dumb CIOs that didn't know any better. That is not, all I can tell you is not a single good product company uses that I know. And that should scare you. And if your company's using it, you probably want to start looking for another company. All right. Next, changing how you solve problems. So moving to real agile, that's changing how you build. Moving to product discovery and empowered product teams, that's changing how you solve problems. That's, of course, a pretty big conceptual difference. Instead of your stakeholders giving you a roadmap of features to build, which are basically hoped for solutions. We're hoping this does what we need it to do. And then the team's just doing a little design and coding and shipping. I mean, that's not product discovery. That's just design, code, ship. If, however, you change so that now the product team is given problems to solve, now the product team has to build the skills to solve that problem. And that's what product discovery is, coming up with a solution that's valuable, usable, feasible, viable. To also, one more point about product managers, if you're not doing this, if you're not trying to change how you solve problems to instead of implement features, that's another reason you don't need a product manager. The reason product managers were invented 30 years ago was around this, for value and viability. Otherwise, you're probably just a project manager. If you're a feature team, that's what's going on. It's still helpful, but probably not what you wanted. Okay. So, changing how you solve problems. The idea here is we're given a problem to solve. The first thing we do is we tackle the risks, value, usability, feasibility, viability. We have to make sure we are addressing each of those risks before we put anything on the backlog for our engineers to build. And again, coming up with those, the prototypes, that's product design and engineering. It also means solving those problems collaboratively, product design and engineering together. And we're held accountable to results. So what we want to do is actually solve the problem. And that's why we'll iterate as many times as we need to. All right, so that's what that means. And the third area, because so far, we're still working on the problems that the different stakeholders identified. But that sort of begs the question, how do we know those are the most important problems to work on? That's a much more difficult question. Every company has opportunities, lots of them. And every company has threats. Which opportunities should the company really pursue? Which threats should you take seriously? That's the topic of product strategy. And the third element of a strong product company is that they have very good skills in data, in qualitative research, to understand in enabling technology and industry trends, to understand what really are the best opportunities for your company and what are the threats that you need to take seriously. None of us can do everything we want to do, even the most wealthy companies in the world. They still have just as much. In fact, I would argue the two richest companies I know and work with is Apple and Google. They have more money than God, in truth. They have so much money. They are still incredibly limited by the problems they can pursue. They don't have nearly as many people as they wish they have. Even when they're trying to hire as fast as they can only go so fast. And look at the opportunities those companies have. So, this becomes incredibly important. Maybe one company I haven't mentioned enough, they are so good at everything we're talking about, is Stripe. Stripe, I think they're the most valuable private company right now in the world, but Stripe is disrupting the financial services industry. By the way, two co-founders, they came from outside the industry, but they have been delivering so impressively, so consistently. They deserve everything they've got. But you may wonder, how is it that a team of 100 engineers can completely outperform a company of 1,000 engineers, or in the case of their main competitors, 10,000 engineers? Massively bigger. Product strategy. Product strategy is a force multiplier. It lets you get so much more out of your organization as compared to your competitors. Okay, those are the three things. Changing how you build, changing how you solve problems, and changing how you decide which problems you want to pursue. Those are the three things that really define a strong product company. And what I would encourage you to do is consider which of those three do you need to work on maybe in your company. If you have all three, awesome. But if not, that's where I'd focus my efforts. Okay, so I think we're on schedule there. Am I? Pretty much? I think so. We have some time for some questions. Oh, no, I went over.
Yeah, I think the good news is that it was so interesting that we didn't feel like we wanted to rush you, so we gave you more time than expected. The bad news is we don't have time for questions because we're 500 people here. We need to eat in an hour. So if you want to keep it on time, I think we don't have time for questions.
Okay.
But I'll invite everyone to...
Well, let me do this then, just for the end here. My email is right there. So anybody who has a question and didn't get a chance to ask it, because I talked too long, please send me a note. And thanks to Google Translate, do it in whatever language you like.
Thank you.
Thank you.